September 16, 1979. 2,000 meters above the death strip. The ambient temperature is -8 degrees Celsius. A modified 11-kilogram propane tank splutters. The primary burner dies. Gravity reasserts its absolute authority over 750 kilograms of human mass and canvas. 8 bodies begin a free fall toward 50,000 armed guards. The aerodynamic profile collapses. A 24-year-old bricklayer removes his glove. His nerve endings register the freezing air. He strikes a single match. The margin between an unrecorded death and a historical anomaly rests on the chemical ignition of phosphorus against a friction strip. He cups the flame. The wind velocity reaches 30 kilometers per hour. The match holds. The propane ignites. A 12-meter pillar of fire halts their descent. They are flying in a patchwork balloon constructed from umbrella silk and bedsheets. A 4,000 cubic meter anomaly defying the most militarized border in human history. To understand how 2 factory workers bypassed a 1,400-kilometer kill zone, we must reverse the timeline. We must examine the mechanical failures, the thermodynamic calculations, and the precise moment an entire intelligence apparatus was rendered completely blind by a sewing machine. Mid-1970s. The German Democratic Republic. The architecture of containment is absolute. The perimeter consists of 3-meter-high concrete slabs. Chain-link fences laced with razor wire designed to shear human tissue. Watchtowers positioned at 500-meter intervals. The operational protocol for guards requires 0 cognitive hesitation. Visual confirmation equals lethal force. Between the physical barriers lies the death strip. Mechanically raked sand engineered to record microscopic surface disturbances. Footprints trigger localized manhunts. The perimeter defense incorporates SM-70 automated spring guns. Directional fragmentation mines wired to trip lines. 80 steel cubes discharged at killing velocity upon a 3-kilogram pressure threshold. A pure kinetic response. No human oversight. By 1979, subterranean evasion is statistically obsolete. Seismic sensors detect acoustic vibrations from digging within a 48-hour window. The Ministry for State Security, known as the Stasi, intercepts subterranean operations systematically. Automotive concealment requires bypassing physical dismantling. Guards utilize industrial mirrors and canine olfaction protocols. Coastal evasion routes face continuous illumination sweeps. The 2-dimensional plane of the border is mathematically sealed. March 1978. Postnek. Peter Strelchik is an electrician, a former military aviation mechanic. He understands the physical laws governing propulsion and lift. Gunter Wetzel is a bricklayer. His psychological profile demonstrates extreme focus. He lays 10,000 bricks with 0 mechanical deviation. They assess the structural integrity of the border. They identify the vertical axis. The airspace represents the singular unfortified vector. A motorized aircraft requires an engine. The Stasi surveillance grid flags any acquisition of combustion engines. The supply chain is monitored at the microscopic level. Purchasing aviation components guarantees immediate detention. Wetzel proposes a thermal application, a hot air balloon. The physics are primitive. Heat expands air molecules. Decreased density generates lift. No mechanical parts to register. No engine serial numbers to track. The raw materials are innocuous. Fabric and propane. The mathematics of evasion are absolute. 8 subjects equal a combined payload of 750 kilograms. Generating sufficient lift requires 2,000 cubic meters of trapped thermal energy. The envelope demands 800 square meters of textile. This is the equivalent of 2 basketball courts of fabric. Acquiring 800 square meters of material without triggering an intelligence alert constitutes a statistical impossibility. Strelchik calculates the thermal dynamics. Wetzel calculates the structural assembly. They drive 50 kilometers to Gera. They execute a localized deception protocol. Strelchik informs a retail clerk they require material for a camping club tent lining. The clerk authorizes the transaction of 850 meters of cotton cloth. The acquisition breaches the first layer of state surveillance without triggering an alarm. Wetzel's wife initiates the assembly phase. She operates a 40-year-old pedal-driven sewing machine. The mechanical repetition spans consecutive nights. The acoustic signature is muffled. Blisters form, rupture, and harden on her epidermis. Strelchik engineers the thermal generator. He cannibalizes two 11-kilogram domestic propane cylinders. He welds a gondola from scrapped iron. He conducts a localized ignition test at midnight. A 12-meter thermal exhaust column validates the primary propulsion unit. Spring 1978. The prototype is deployed in an isolated forest zone. The thermal generator engages. The envelope expands. Then the physical reality of the material asserts itself. Cotton is highly porous. The molecular weave permits thermal escape. The hot air bleeds through the fabric faster than the burner can replace it. The internal pressure drops. The envelope collapses. Gravity remains undefeated. The prototype is fundamentally flawed. A 2,400 mark investment evaporates. Strelchik incinerates the evidence in a domestic furnace. He meters the combustion rate to avoid suspicious smoke signatures. The failure is absolute. The operation pivots to material science. Wetzel converts a kitchen into a testing laboratory. They procure microscopic samples of synthetic textiles, umbrella silk, nylon, taffeta. They apply thermal stress via domestic ovens. They measure air permeability using vacuum pressure. The empirical data isolate synthetic taffeta as the optimal material. High density, low porosity. They travel 160 kilometers to Leipzig. A major urban center dilutes visual identification. They deploy a secondary deception protocol, a sailing club requiring sailcloth. They order 800 meters. The transaction generates a paper trail, a documented anomaly in the state economic registry. They anticipate an immediate Stasi intervention. They return the following day. The material is waiting. 4,800 marks. The transaction clears. They transport the material at exact legal speed limits. The second envelope is assembled in 14 days. It achieves optimal pressurization, but the thermal unit fails to generate sufficient lift for the mass. Strelchik analyzes the fluid dynamics of the propane tanks. He inverts the cylinders. Liquid propane enters the nozzle directly. The vaporization rate multiplies exponentially. The thermal output spikes. The propulsion system is finalized. July 3, 1979. Wetzel withdraws. The mathematical margins appear too narrow. Strelchik initiates the launch sequence with his family of 4. The thermal unit roars. The envelope achieves vertical velocity, 4 meters per second. The altitude registers 2,000 meters. Atmospheric physics intervene. The envelope enters a dense cloud layer. Vapor condenses on the exterior surface. The water mass increases the payload. The thermal energy dissipates rapidly. The descent is uncontrolled. The gondola impacts the forest canopy. The structural integrity fails. The occupants survive. Strelchik navigates the immediate perimeter. He locates a discarded commercial wrapper. The typographical data confirms their coordinates. They are 180 meters short of the western border. They have crashed inside the primary kill zone. They are trapped within the death strip. The operational window is collapsing. They initiate a low-profile exfiltration. 9 hours of crawling through the fortified zone. They bypass the acoustic sensors. They avoid the raked sand. They extract themselves from the perimeter. They recover their vehicle. They return to their residence. They initiate a biological deception, claiming a gastrointestinal virus to their employers. They assume the breach remains undetected. July 4th, 1979. Border patrols detect the wreckage. 800 square meters of synthetic fabric, modified propane cylinders, an improvised thermal generator. The physical evidence triggers an immediate, maximal priority Stasi mobilization. The intelligence apparatus shifts from passive monitoring to active hunting. Strelchik liquidates all remaining evidence. He sells his vehicle to eliminate tire track correlation. The Stasi deploys field agents to interrogate textile merchants. The net tightens geographically. Mid-August, the state executes an unprecedented maneuver. They publish the forensic data in national newspapers, detailed descriptions of the customized thermal unit and the synthetic textile. They solicit civilian informants. The psychological pressure is immense. Strelchik and Wetzel realize their operational window is effectively zero. Every auditory stimulus outside their residences registers as a potential raid. The Stasi possesses their mechanical blueprint. They decide to counter the active manhunt with an immediate escalation. A third iteration. 4,000 cubic meters. Double the volume. 1,250 meters of fabric. 6 kilometers of thread. The most massive unauthorized aerodynamic structure in Soviet bloc history. They initiate assembly while actively hunted. The intelligence net contracts. Surveillance assets monitor textile distribution nodes. Unmarked vehicles establish static observation posts near Strelchik's perimeter. The theoretical probability of apprehension approaches absolute certainty. They execute a decentralized procurement strategy. The spouses navigate distinct geographical vectors. 50 meters of material acquired at location Alpha, 100 meters at location Bravo, umbrella silk, tent nylon, disparate taffeta variants. The visual profile becomes a chaotic spectrum: blue, green, striped, and plaid segments, a macroscopic patchwork necessitated by microscopic supply chain evasion. The architectural dimensions scale exponentially. 4,000 cubic meters of internal volume. The vertical axis measures 25 meters. The horizontal diameter spans 20 meters. The equivalent structural displacement of an 8-story building. The assembly requires 1,250 meters of composite synthetic fabric. The structural integrity relies on over 6 kilometers of continuous thread. The mechanical stress destroys the primary sewing apparatus. The internal motor combusts under continuous operational load. Strelchik initiates an emergency mechanical salvage protocol. He dismantles an acoustic record player. He extracts the rotational motor. He reverse engineers the electrical contacts. He integrates the salvaged motor into the sewing mechanism. The assembly resumes. The psychological environment degrades. Civilian neighbors conduct unannounced perimeter breaches. The clandestine manufacturing facility exists directly above the domestic hosting space. Biological stress markers elevate. Heart rates stabilize through forced cognitive suppression. Frank, the 15-year-old biological dependent, is integrated into the operational matrix. The survival of the biological unit depends on an adolescent maintaining absolute information security. The first week of September 1979. The third prototype achieves structural completion. The physical mass registers at 180 kilograms of synthetic patchwork. The gondola framework undergoes maximum reinforcement. The thermal propulsion unit integrates 4 distinct 11-kilogram liquid propane cylinders. The combined output potential is a sustained 12-meter thermal exhaust column. A sudden Stasi raid would encounter an undeniable physical anomaly. The evidence is mathematically irrefutable. September 15, 1979. An unauthorized radio frequency intercepts a West German meteorological broadcast. The atmospheric data indicates a high-pressure system. Sustained northern wind vectors. The trajectory pushes directly south toward the Bavarian geographical zone. Cloud cover is minimal. Precipitation probability approaches 0. This represents the singular mathematical window for deployment. Delaying the launch guarantees interaction with autumn cyclonic storm systems. Delay guarantees apprehension. They initiate the final logistical sequence. The payload is strictly prioritized. State identification documents. Vital chronological records. Liquid capital. Thermal insulation layers. The biological dependents are subjected to a secondary deception. They are informed of a nocturnal recreational excursion. Ambient light levels reach 0. Both biological units load into Strelchik's vehicle and Wetzel's motorized cycle. They navigate to an isolated geographical depression near Heinersdorf. 0130 hours, September 16. Lunar illumination is 0. Stellar visibility is optimal. The 180-kilogram fabric envelope is physically unrolled across the terrain. A portable internal combustion fan engages. The mechanical rotation forces ambient atmospheric gas into the synthetic envelope. The structure inflates horizontally. Strelchik confirms the optimal internal volume. He initiates the primary ignition sequence. Liquid propane vaporizes. A massive thermal column erupts into the localized darkness. The synthetic giant achieves vertical orientation. The physical dimensions dominate the immediate visual field. The thermal exhaust generates a massive optical signature. An external security asset spots the localized illumination anomaly. The anomaly is relayed via radio transmission to Central Command. The launch window shrinks from hours to seconds. The armed response protocol is active. The command is issued. 8 human targets board the reinforced gondola. The cumulative payload tests the structural limits. The tethering system requires manual termination. 2 female operatives deploy edged weapons. The primary and secondary anchors are severed. The kinetic release is immediate. The tertiary anchor mechanism experiences a catastrophic mechanical snag. The structural physics fail symmetrically. The massive synthetic envelope tilts violently. The gondola shifts its center of gravity. 8 bodies are thrown against the reinforced iron mesh. The thermal exhaust column deviates from the central vertical axis. The 12-meter flame directly contacts the synthetic nylon perimeter. The chemical composition ignites instantly. The structural integrity is compromised. The dependents initiate acoustic panic responses. Wetzel anticipates the thermal cascade. He deploys a localized chemical fire suppression unit. The extinguisher smothers the chemical combustion in under 3 seconds. The visual evidence is a blackened carbonized tear in the primary envelope. The thermodynamic consequences remain unknown. The thermal lift overcomes the terrestrial tether. They achieve vertical ascent. 100 meters. 200 meters. The biological canopy below recedes. The launch coordinates are swallowed by absolute darkness. Strelchik maximizes the liquid propane flow. The acoustic signature is absolute taint, a continuous mechanical roar masking the physiological stress responses of 8 individuals. The thermal generation directly correlates to vertical velocity. 500 meters, 1,000 meters. The terrestrial defense grid activates. High-intensity illumination beams sweep the atmospheric perimeter. The optical sensors of the border guard units attempt to lock on to the thermal anomaly. The vertical velocity exceeds the operational parameters of the surface-to-air defense grid. They reach 2,000 meters. The atmospheric trajectory stabilizes at 30 kilometers per hour. The vector points absolute west. The radial intercepts confirm an unidentified aerial anomaly ascending beyond intercept capabilities. The localized aviation assets require a 15-minute operational spool-up. The ballistic trajectories of standard AK-47 munitions peak at 1,500 meters. Peak at 1,500 meters, the subjects have mathematically exited the killing zone. The primary threat shifts from the state apparatus to absolute physics. The atmospheric temperature at 2,000 meters registers at -8 degrees Celsius. The biological subjects lack sufficient thermal insulation. The physiological response to extreme cold initiates. Peripheral blood vessels constrict. Core temperature preservation protocols activate. The adolescent subjects experience violent muscular tremors. Dental enamel impacts repetitively. The maternal units attempt to share core body heat. The wind velocity shreds the expelled carbon dioxide clouds. The thermal degradation is absolute. The architectural flaw asserts its dominance. The structural damage from the launch sequence expands under atmospheric pressure. The synthetic envelope tears further. The hot air mass bends violently into the sub-zero environment. The internal density equalizes with the external atmosphere. The primary thermal generator experiences fuel starvation. The flame sputters. The combustion ceases. Gravity reclaims its mathematical dominance. The 750-kilogram payload enters freefall. The deceleration is 0. The biological dependents scream. The gondola framework oscillates violently as the synthetic envelope loses aerodynamic shape. Wetzel anchors himself against the iron mesh. The ambient temperature numbs his digital extremities. Fine motor skills degrade by 80%. He extracts a single phosphorus match. He applies kinetic friction against the chemical strip. The wind velocity threatens to extinguish the microcombustion. He constructs a physical shield with his numb appendages. He introduces the microflame to the primary propane nozzle. The chemical reaction is instantaneous. The thermal column re-establishes. The envelope expands. The vertical descent halts. The vertical descent halts. The physiological relief is visible in expelled vapor. The mathematical reality remains critical. The structural tear continuously vents thermal energy. Maintaining altitude requires an exponential increase in fuel consumption. The liquid propane reserves deplete at an unsustainable rate. The mechanical gauge drops towards absolute 0. The operational timeline is reduced to 180 seconds. The terrestrial terrain below offers 0 geographical confirmation. The optical data is inconclusive. East German municipalities utilize low-intensity incandescent illumination. Western grids deploy high-intensity neon and amber wavelengths. The agricultural divisions provide the final visual data point. Collectivized communist agricultural zones are massive and symmetrical. Western properties present as microscopic irregular grids. A linear illumination anomaly appears, a high-speed automotive transit vector. The Autobahn A9. The rear visual field displays the high-intensity floodlights of a fortified border checkpoint. The geographical transition is confirmed. The final propane cylinder exhausts its liquid volume. The thermal generator dies permanently. The synthetic envelope transitions from a hot air containment unit to a massive, uncontrolled parachute. The internal temperature drops. The atmospheric descent begins from 2,500 meters. The vector targets a dense coniferous forest near the Nayla coordinates. Control mechanisms are non-existent. Gravity and wind velocity dictate the final impact vector. The terrestrial collision is violent. The iron gondola shears through heavy pine branches. The kinetic energy dissipates through structural destruction. The gondola impacts the forest floor. The framework inverts. The biological payload is violently ejected into the heavy undergrowth. Complete silence envelops the impact sound. An adolescent vocalizes pain. The biological survival rate is 100%. Wetzel sustains a severe lower extremity fracture. Cutaneous lacerations and blunt force trauma affect all units. The geographical orientation remains unverified. Strelchik initiates a solo reconnaissance protocol. He intercepts a localized dirt transit route. Automotive headlights approach his position. A mobilized police unit. He raises his upper appendages in a universal surrender posture. The mechanical properties of the vehicle confirm the orientation. The vehicle is an Audi. The East German state exclusively deploys Wartburg or Lada chassis. The mechanical engineering confirms Western jurisdiction. The auditory confirmation is requested. The uniformed officer confirms the status. Freedom is verified. Peter Strelchik collapses on the asphalt. The architectural mastermind who fabricated 3 aeronautical anomalies under active intelligence surveillance loses absolute muscular control. The local authorities extract the remaining biological units. The operational timeline lasted exactly 20 minutes. 1,200 seconds of aerial transit invalidated 18 months of clandestine engineering and a multi-agency manhunt. The state apparatus reacted with immediate humiliation protocols. The supply chain was permanently locked. Liquid propane required centralized registration. Synthetic fabric acquisitions triggered automatic detentions. The loophole was sealed with concrete and bureaucracy. Decades later, the physical artifact hangs suspended in a museum. Visitors observe the stitched panels, umbrella silk, tent nylon, bed sheets. The structural impossibility of the artifact is evident. A multi-billion-dollar defense matrix engineered to detect the slightest acoustic vibration or footprint in the sand was completely bypassed by the manipulation of fundamental thermodynamics. The most impenetrable mechanical fortress on the planet was rendered obsolete because a system designed to look down completely forgot to look up. It proves the ultimate flaw in absolute control. The more rigid the structure, the more fragile its blind spots. If this mechanical dissection of escape physics activated your neural pathways, subscribe to Prison Break Stories. The analysis of human engineering against absolute containment continues. Watch the video on your screen now to see how the prisoner who escaped a gulag created a fake Olympics right under the noses of the Soviet regime. We will dismantle that architecture next.